What is up everybody, welcome back to the Crew 2, and in this video I will be going over my top 4 Rallycross vehicles on the game here. So on the Crew 2 there's going to be at the moment at least 29 Rallycross vehicles in the game, some of which I would say are definitely going to be better options than others. But to be honest guys, I really don't think any of the cars are actually going to be terrible. For example, the Fairlady Z is actually not an awful vehicle, but I would say something like the Fiesta is probably going to be a better option on most of the events. Now, I would say a lot of people are most likely going to see lots of certain vehicles in this class, like the Lancer and or the lovely Enforcer Unit as well, but there is definitely going to be some good options in this class you guys can run on summits. So jumping right into this here, starting off with my fourth vehicle, guys, is going to be an interesting one, the Chevrolet Camaro Z28 Enforcer Unit. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are probably like, you're actually picking something like the Enforcer unit over all the other vehicles in this class, and to be honest guys, I would have to say yes to that. What's kind of interesting is this vehicle wasn't in the game for a while because it did release a long time ago, and they actually decided to bring this car back into the game, and when I saw it, I was like, oh man, that thing actually wasn't that great. But what's funny though is after I did test it out in the Summit, I was like, alright, you know what, I need to drive this car more often. It's actually going to be one of the better rallycross vehicles in the game, and it actually turns out the Enforcer unit is going to be an insanely good car in the Rallycross category, even though it is going to be a 4-speed, which I know a lot of people who drive manual are most likely not going to be the biggest fan of the Z28, mainly because it is going to be kind of wonky to use in certain events when using a Rallycross vehicle. But overall, guys, I do have to admit, I think this car is actually going to be pretty dang good. I would actually say it's going to be one of the better 4-speeds in the entire game. Not only that, the Z28 also can hit around 184 miles per hour, definitely putting it up there with some of the faster rallycross vehicles as well. So this thing is definitely not going to be struggling in anything at all when it comes to speed overall. Now, one thing I did notice with the vehicles on the Crew 2, especially some of the rallycross cars when racing off-road, you guys will definitely want something with a good overall speed, at least compared to a higher top speed, even though from the testing I have done, most of the rallycross vehicles are pretty dang similar when it comes to a top speed, but some cars are most likely going to be slightly different when racing, like coming out of corners, or at least trying to get around certain areas as fast as you can. Some cars might be kind of wonky, like for example with like a 4 or 5 speed when you might shift. I noticed the vehicle might sometimes lose speed or be kind of wonky with trying to get the speed back up. Luckily, I noticed the more I was using the Z28 that honestly that 4 speed was getting much easier to use. And one thing I was noticing, guys, on many of the corners on this as well is the fact that you normally would want to be in third gear. I know sometimes you do want to drop one of these cars into second thinking you do need to drop another gear, at least compared to like maybe a 5 and or 6 speed transmission. One thing I did notice about the Z28 though is if you guys do drop into second, at least on many of the tracks and or tighter turns, I noticed the car would basically redline, so being in third gear and using more of that nitrous is probably going to be the best option, and it really does keep the speed up tremendously on these cars as well. So this car easily earned a 4 spot for me, mainly because it's going to be so dang versatile. You can basically jump into one of these smaller events and or the longer ones, and my goodness guys, the handling on the C28 is by far going to be one of the best in the entire rallycross category, even to this day after this car came out a second time. And now moving over to number 3 on the list is actually going to be the Ford Fiesta. What's kind of funny, guys, I've been using this car more than basically any other rallycross vehicle in the game recently. And basically every single summit I have been running the Fiesta, and my goodness, I love this thing. Now, one thing I do have to admit is I'm sure a lot of people are probably not going to like this car compared to something like the Mitsubishi WRC05, which honestly I really can't blame you all that much on that, but my goodness guys, the Ford Fiesta is definitely going to be worth a look. I find this thing to have great handling and stability. It's also going to have insanely good speed as well, so this car hits around 192 miles per hour, making it one of the fastest rallycross vehicles in the game besides a few other ones, so it's definitely going to get up there when it comes to its top speed. And one of my favorite things about the Fiesta as well is the way this car actually feels when you're racing it. I did notice a lot of people don't tend to use this car all that much in summits, which I found pretty interesting. I was noticing, I'm sure a lot of people also see this as well in the summits, that you're probably going to see the same couple of vehicles in most of the events because they're going to be that good. So one thing I have been trying to do is really test out different vehicles, and after testing out the Fiesta a little bit, I was like, you know what? I feel like this car is actually going to be worth a look, and it does seem to be insanely good. I'm not saying, guys, this car is by far going to be like the best rallycross vehicle, but I really do think it's going to be good enough to where it can compete against like the WRC05 and or the Cadillac Enforcer Unit as well, because those are obviously kings in this class. But even with some of these other vehicles being that good in every class, I would say there's still going to be lots of hidden gems in each class you guys can run. Something like the Camaro Z28 Enforcer Unit's also going to be in that list, but we also have something like the Ford Fiesta as well, where this car can easily compete in the summits. Now, to be honest, you're probably not going to break any records with this car when you do use it, but I really do think it's going to easily be good enough to actually be used in the summits and like score competitively. The Ford Fiesta for me is by far going to be one of those hidden gems on the Crew 2 because you just never see this car being used all that often. I would say I might have seen this vehicle maybe 1 or 2 times in the leaderboards, so it's definitely going to be on the rare side, but it's kind of insane, guys, because the Ford Fiesta is still going to be one heck of an option for the summits, and I would say this car can easily compete with some of the kings in this class, even though it's not going to be as good as those. And now moving over to number 2 on the list is going to be the Cadillac Escalade Enforcer Unit. What's kind of interesting about this one is when this vehicle did release a while ago, I never saw that many people actually use this car, and I have a feeling that's most likely going to be due to what vehicle's in first place, but I really do feel like the Cadillac is going to be one of the best handling vehicles in the Crew 2, and not only that, guys, what's also insane about this vehicle, this thing can hit 192 miles per hour as well, so it's going to be basically right up there with the lovely Ford Fiesta. The Cadillac is not only going to be one of the fastest rallycross vehicles in the game, but the overall acceleration and speed on this thing is also really impressive. One of the funniest things I found about it is the fact that it is going to be a Cadillac SUV, and you're racing this thing as a rallycross vehicle like something you would see like a Subaru or like a Ford Escort or even like a Ford Fiesta actually competing in. I really don't think you're going to see a Cadillac Escalade in rallycross, but that would be the craziest thing ever. The Cadillac to me was always one of those interesting rallycross cars because for some odd reason, guys, I just never saw that many people run this thing. Even in like older summits and stuff, I would always run the Cadillac, and I feel like a lot of players did not use it. One of the main reasons why I would say that is probably going to be the... Now, one of the most interesting things about the Cadillac is due to the fact that I never really saw people actually run this car. I have a feeling that's most likely going to be due to the transmission redlining at 5K, so if you guys are driving manually, you're going to be finding yourself shifting this thing insanely often. I personally like having the transmission set up like this in some way though, because you can find higher gears and also accelerate a bit quicker going around corners and stuff as well. And one of the biggest highlights of the Cadillac by far, guys, is going to be its handling. I would actually go as far as saying this is one of the most stable vehicles in the entire game when it comes to going around a corner. Like, my goodness, this truck basically eats the corners for breakfast. Like, it has no issues. It also feels insanely stable when coming out of the corners as well. So you really can't go wrong with a vehicle that's going to be insanely fast, not only in acceleration, but also in handling as well. It's going to be really hard to touch something like that, and I feel like the Cadillac is by far going to be in that category. When this SUV released a while back, I actually considered this thing to be slightly underrated and or just not used that often. I have a feeling more players are probably testing out the Cadillac now, but if you guys haven't driven this thing and or you're kind of debating on buying it, I would definitely recommend taking a look at this truck, guys. Like, it's going to be pretty dang impressive. Even to this day, I would definitely say the Cadillac is still by far going to be one of the best rallycross vehicles in the entire game, even compared to some of the other vehicles I have been seeing pop up, which honestly I really don't see anything else being used all that often, so I have a feeling the Cadillac is still going to remain one of the kings. And now moving over to number 1 on the list is going to be the Mitsubishi Lancer WRC05. I'm not going to lie, guys, I had issues debating on putting this car in second and or first, but what's kind of interesting is after driving this car more often compared to the Escalade, the WRC05 is definitely not going to be slow by any means. It's also going to be one of the fastest rallycross cars as well, and I also think in a lot of ways we can agree this is also going to be one of the best looking rallycross vehicles in the Crew 2. I really do love the way this thing actually looks like. It brings me right back to Dirt 2. My goodness, that game was so good, but I also feel like in some ways that's probably why a lot of people don't like the Enforcer unit as well, because for one it's like an SUV, and you would most likely never see that racing in any events in real life, so the WRC05 is easily going to win when it comes to its looks, and not only does it look really good, my goodness, the performance on this vehicle is going to be insane as well, guys. So one of the biggest differences with this thing, at least from the testing I have done with this and or the Enforcer unit, is going to be the way the transmission is set up on the WRC05, at least compared to the Enforcer unit. This car is going to redline at around 6,000 RPMs, and I noticed the Escalade redlines at 5. Now I'm sure upon first glance you're probably going to be like, well, that's only 1,000 RPMs, so how are they actually going to be different? But the Mitsubishi seems to be a lot more smooth when it comes to its shifting, at least compared to the Enforcer unit. It's kind of interesting how only 1,000 RPM actually makes a difference with that. And if you guys are running manual, I'm sure you're going to notice the difference pretty fast. I would also say that's one of the biggest reasons why so many people probably pick the WRC05 over the Enforcer unit, as well as probably going to be the difference in the transmission. Now when it comes to the handling of this vehicle, it's really going to be pretty dang similar to the Cadillac as well. At first I found this kind of funny because I really wasn't using the Escalade like I used to after I started using the Mitsubishi. And if I had to guess, I would say most players have probably noticed how most of the leaderboards in the game, at least when it comes to summits and or just rallycross events in general, it's mostly the Mitsubishi WRC05. So I was like, you know what, I really need to jump into this car and actually try this thing out. And similar to the top speed of the Ford Fiesta and or the Escalade, this car is also going to do around 190 plus miles per hour as well, so this thing is going to be insanely fast, especially compared to many of the other rallycross vehicles. But after running the Mitsubishi for a little bit, I was actually finding this car to be a lot more fun to use in the events. I also found this thing to be a lot better in some ways with the way it was cornering, so this thing's probably going to grip pretty similar to how the Cadillac can around corners as well. But one thing I noticed with this car, guys, is the fact that it can slide just a little bit. Now I'm sure similar to me, you're probably going to be asking yourself how this car is going to be better with the fact of it actually sliding. What's kind of funny, guys, I do find this car to be a lot more fun to use on most of the events in the summit. I also do understand why so many people really do run this vehicle, because even though it might slide, I really do think this car is going to have that edge over the Escalade, which is most likely why many people are probably not running that truck like I thought they were going to when it did release. I really do think this car is probably going to be number one in this class pretty much by a landslide, and I have a feeling it's going to stay like that for a long time because we have a car that is not only going to be insanely fast in the rallycross category, which I have a feeling this car is most likely going to keep owning this class for a while, it's also going to look insanely good, plus the handling is definitely going to be on par with some of the best cars in the game as well, so I really do think the Mitsubishi is easily going to stay on top. But one of the biggest things, guys, is I do like testing out other vehicles to see if they can go against something like the Mitsubishi and or the Cadillac as well, because I do think those are two of the best vehicles in the rallycross category. I did want to try something out like the Ford Fiesta to see how it could go against these, and to actually see if you can run a car like that in a summit and still get into platinum. I do feel like many people might be looking for something else to use besides some of these quote-unquote meta vehicles, so at least we do have options that we can run and still score and get into platinum with some of these oddball vehicles like the Ford Fiesta and or the Z28 Enforcer Unit. I honestly don't really use a lot of these quote-unquote meta vehicles at all unless I absolutely have to. One of the things I was focusing on with these summits is to try out vehicles you just never really see, and I really do think you can actually get into platinum with many of these odd hidden gem vehicles on the Crew 2. What's also kind of interesting, guys, is with my settings on these vehicles as well, it's like a base type of setting, and it turns out it's going to work on many of these cars, and I have a feeling you could probably actually make them a tad better. But overall, I really feel like these base settings are going to make most of these cars insanely good, at least so you can get into platinum and go after some of these awesome vehicles. I really cannot wait for Motorfest to come out as well, because I have a feeling the summits in that game are going to be so dang fun as well. But I do want to know what you guys think in the comments below. Which rallycross vehicle is going to be your favorite and why? And here are my settings I'm currently running on my top 4 Rallycross vehicles, which I really do think all 4 of these cars are going to be worth another look.